All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick's on the Power. So today I wanted to make a video about a bodybuilder by the name of Paul Dillett. Now, Paul Dillett was one of the original mass monsters who came along in the early 1990s. He began his competitive career in 1991 as an amateur at the NPC North Americans, where he placed second in the heavyweight division at his very first competition ever. Now, I've only made one other video about Paul Dillett, and in that video, I just talk about the fact that in the 1994 Arnold Classic, there was a major incident where Paul Dillett actually collapsed on stage. So he seemed to kind of lock up. He couldn't move. He couldn't really pose, and he just kind of collapsed. So basically what happened at this 1994 Arnold Classic was Paul Dillett at the prejudging, you could tell he was visibly cramping up and having muscle spasms on stage. So he ended up leaving the prejudging early, and he would end up coming back out for the night show to finish his routine. And during the night show, he had the same spasms and the same cramps, and they were so bad that he actually yelled out on stage, "Oh my God." And at that point, when he yelled out, the people from backstage came out and kind of caught him and took him off the stage, and they laid him on a table in the backstage. There's a lot of famous photos of that were actually published in a magazine back in the 90s. So I say Paul Dillett was one of the original mass monsters because he was. His off-season weight was 330 pounds or 150 kilograms, which at that time was an insane amount of weight. We don't have guys like we have today, and even today, it's very rare to find someone that gets up to 330 in the off season. But it's important to keep in mind that Paul Dillett was a very tall bodybuilder. He was 6'2" or 188 centimeters tall, which is pretty tall for a bodybuilder. Most bodybuilders tend to be just around 6 foot or under 6 foot. Guys like Phil Heath, Jay Cutler, those guys are like 5'8", 5'9", 5'10". So being 6'2" makes you really stand out on stage. Being 6'2", 330 in the off season makes you really stand out. So in competition, he weighed about 285 on stage or 129 kilograms. Now keep in mind, Dorian Yates was said to be the mass monster of the 90s, and Dorian Yates' weight in the off season ranged from 282 to 309 pounds or 128 to 140 kilograms, and his competition weight ranged between 118 and 128 kilograms or 260 to 282 pounds. So even at his heaviest, Dorian is still about 5 pounds lighter than Paul Dillett. And at his lightest, he gives up about 25 pounds of muscle to Paul Dillett. So that's how big Paul Dillett was, that there were times where he outmuscled Dorian Yates by about 25 pounds. One of the things that always stuck out to me about Paul Dillett was his crucifix pose. Now, he was one of the few bodybuilders that was able to pull this off, especially being a tall bodybuilder. A lot of taller bodybuilders have kind of lankier, longer arms and don't really have that thickness and that tricep hang that would allow them to pull off the crucifix pose. But Paul Dillett always pulled it off in a very extraordinary fashion, and he always had a very good crucifix pose. That's one of the things that really impressed me about him is when he hit it, he would have veins that would go across his chest, and when he hit the crucifix pose, those veins would just pop out, almost connecting his two arms in the crucifix pose. He always had these crazy little jagged veins in his upper shoulders and upper pecs that would just look crazy whenever he hit those kinds of poses. So for me, the crucifix pose was really one of his calling cards. So let's talk about his competitive history. So this guy was really one of those guys that competed all the time, multiple times per year, and really just went hard. So this guy competed in a ton of Grand Prix from 1994 all the way until 1997. And during that time, I think there's only 1 or 2 instances where he placed outside of the top 5. So this guy was a consistent Grand Prix just slayer. He won shows like the Grand Prix Germany, the Grand Prix France, and he was constantly first, second, third at all these, European Grand Prix. So he did very well out there at those shows throughout the early 90s to the mid 90s. So let's talk about his Olympia placings. So this guy was a top 6 threat to the Olympia all throughout the mid 90s. So his best Olympia placing was 4th place in 1994, and that was actually the year that he was competing in the most Grand Prix. So it kind of coincides with his success of the Grand Prix. You could say that, competing more really sharpened him up, made his conditioning a little bit better, and gave him a little bit more experience. So 4th place in 1994, that was his best finish. 1993, he placed 6th. 1996, he placed 5th. 1997, he placed 5th. And of course, 1999, he placed 5th as well. And then his Arnold Classics placings are basically the same story. He had a bunch of top 6 finishes at the Arnold Classic. And then his most noteworthy win was probably the Night of Champions in 1999. So the Night of Champions, for those of you who don't know, is now considered to be the New York Pro. So Paul Dillett would continue to compete until 2006 with the IFBB and the Montreal Pro, where he would place 10th. But he did not officially end his competitive bodybuilding career until 2012. And that's right around the time that he founded his own kind of bodybuilding organization known as the WBFF, or World Beauty, Fitness, and Fashion. Now, to me, it seems kind of more like a modeling competition than a bodybuilding competition. The competition that is closest to bodybuilding is called the Muscle Model Division, which is kind of a cross between basically modeling and bodybuilding. But if you look at the WBFF website, it seems to be marketed more closely to women and more exclusively to women. Pretty much the majority of the pictures on their website are all women kind of in their costumes. And that was kind of the theme of the WBFF, similar to Vince McMahon's WBF, the World Bodybuilding Federation. The competitors are allowed to wear costumes, they perform, and their performance and costume is kind of part of how they're judged, and that's all part of their character, kind of. So the men's divisions are kind of men's physique-y, not really entirely bodybuilding. But it's kind of bodybuilding. So it's a lot different than the IFBB, honestly. And he probably did that intentionally because I don't think there was ever any really bad blood between him and the IFBB. So he probably never really wanted to make something that was going to be a direct rival. But it is pretty similar to men's physique in the bikini and figure competitions and that sort of thing. So that's what Paul Dillett is doing now. He is still alive, and he is one of the original mass monsters from the 90s. Please give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.